Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Price and Value Journey. I'm John Ray. Today, I'm truly honored to welcome the consultant's consultant to the show, Professor Joe Omani. Joe is a leading authority on the consulting industry. He's a trusted advisor to consulting firms, large and small, across the size spectrum, and he helps firms with their growth, pricing, strategy, succession, and other issues. He literally has written the textbook on consulting. It's called Management Consulting. It's the best-selling textbook on the subject in Europe. And his latest book, which I highly recommend, is called Growth, Building a Successful Consultancy in the Digital Age. And it's quickly become a go-to resource for consulting firm leaders worldwide. Joe teaches consulting at Cardiff University, and his research on the profession has earned prestigious awards and shaped numerous government-funded studies on consulting. Joe, welcome to the Price and Value Journey.
Thank you, John. That's a wonderful introduction. I will try and do justice to it.
It helps that it's all true. So,
Well, yeah. It's funny, isn't it? You get old enough at some point, and you do think, God, I've done all of that stuff. It's scary.
You have done it with grace and great work. So we're delighted to have you here. And I guess,
kind of you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to maybe start by talking about, give us a 40,000 foot perspective. You've been working with studying consulting firms for a couple of decades now or more. What are the big shifts that you are seeing currently in the way consulting firms grow, compete, and create value for their clients?
Okay, it's a really good question, and I think you and I perhaps I may be insulting you, John, but I don't take offence. But I think you and I might be of a similar age, and there is a tendency amongst these youth of today to think that everything is new, and of course, people have been saying for 40 years that the consulting industry is being disrupted. And so what we've got is some quite long-term trends by which the industry is changing. So number one, the industry has grown year on year around 10% for the last 100 years. So it's much bigger than it was. Number two, clients have got a lot more sophisticated. They, instead of coming to consultancies and saying, what should we do? They're more commonly now saying, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to pay. Are you going to help us? Which is slightly terrifying if you remember the good old days of consulting when you could bedazzle people with a PowerPoint. You've got procurement coming in increasingly, and you've got a lot more competition. So there's more and more firms out there. There's lots of people that left the big four and have started their own firms with the hope of being bought. You've got private equity putting money into consulting firms. So it's much tougher than it was. There's a requirement for value. Margins are more difficult to get. And obviously, more recently, two big things are happening. Firstly, there's been the long recession, I would say, since COVID, that a lot of consulting firms have really struggled with. And the second is the introduction of artificial intelligence, which, albeit is a bit of a slow burner in consultancy, I'm starting to see more and more evidence that it's having some impact. So I guess what I've done there is trace some sort of long-term trends and a couple that are perhaps a bit more recent.
Let's talk about the myths and outdated beliefs that firms are still holding on to out of all that, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's another good question. The last book I wrote, Growth, you rightly cited it as growth in the digital age. And I think a lot of founders who were brought up perhaps with the view of the trusted advisor, long-term, deep relationships, that's still really important. And people buy from people. It's still a relationship business, and your reputation and credibility. And of course, this is a theme of your wonderful book as well. It is all about that. But there has been a transformation in the ability for We're all experts at something, but it's the ability of those experts to become visible. And both digital media and artificial intelligence give consulting firms the opportunity to get visibility of their subject matter experts that would simply have been impossible 10 years ago. And a lot of firms aren't making the most of that. And this is really top of the funnel stuff. The fact that you're present on LinkedIn is probably not going to land you a 6 or 7 figure deal, but it's certainly going to make you familiar to people, and it helps with the trust. I'm quite I'm quite present on LinkedIn, and I now don't do any outbound sales. All of my sales are inbound. And very often when people reach out to me, they've been following me for 2, 3, or 4 years. And so they know what I'm like. They know my material. They know what my take is going to be. They know where I can help and can't help. And that helps consultancies skip a lot of the process. I guess the second, there's quite a few myths. I think the second thing might be around the hourly rate. Now, don't get me wrong. I think you and I both know that the hourly rate can be useful, or the daily rate can be useful. But increasingly, clients are looking for value, and either some form of value-based pricing or fixed pricing, especially as AI starts to add value to the equation. Because obviously, if you're charging a daily rate, you're not getting the benefits of using AI or any other forms of efficiency that might be helping your analysis or recommendations. So I'd say that was the second thing. I think the third thing is, and this is an interesting trend, is that in the last 20 years, there's been a real transformation in the market for buyers of consultancy. So previously, it was relatively rare for consultancies to be bought or even invested in by private equity, because they don't have any assets other than the people, really, compared to a car business or a tech business. But over the last 10, 15 years, that's transformed, and the build to sell strategy has become quite dominant now amongst boutique firms. And I don't think a lot of CEOs and founders realize how competitive the marketplace is from a seller's perspective. If you're trying to sell your consultancy, there's probably another 5 consultancies for sale at the same time, probably in your area. So really thinking quite early about your value proposition and what you're going to sell and what you look like to a buyer is increasingly important, I think.
You mentioned a couple of things there that I want to get to, but I think where some of those issues seem to coalesce for me is around size. And I know there's no one hard and fast dividing line, but it seems to me what you're talking about is along the scale spectrum, and as firms scale, you've got, I guess, the left side, the smaller boutique firms are really built on trust, relationships, and then you get to a point where the growth comes from what you call procurement, RFPs, where there's a little more lack of control, I guess you might say, in terms of how you build your business. And that affects pricing. It affects a lot of different things. Yeah. So what is that point in your mind?
Oh, that's a really good question. Isn't it interesting? Because I won't mention their name, obviously. I recently went into a firm of 200 people. And they asked me to help out with a bit of business development training. And I thought that's fairly normal. The founder wants to step away and all the rest of it. But usually in a firm above 50 people, you have some form of architecture. You have the systems, processes, you have a CRM, you have recruitment policies, you have role descriptions and all the rest of it. Not all at the same time. You build it up from 50 to 100 people. And this firm had none of that. Literally, it was the founder doing all the sales, and then just a team of people delivering, 199 people delivering and one person selling, and no structure. And then sometimes, and so that firm is going to find it really hard to get beyond that. And in fact, they'll probably retrench because it's eventually the founder can't keep feeding the beast and you're going to get more and more errors. But
Right.
then sometimes I'll go into a 30-person firm or even a 20-person firm and they've set themselves up for growth. So already they have professional service automation, they have a CRM, they have role description, they've got a clear value proposition. And for those people, just the growth is going to be a lot easier. So that transition from growing, which is where you're really trying to work out what your business is about, to scaling, where you've got your systems, processes, and structure in place ready to scale, to help you scale, can vary. I would typically say it should be around the 50 or 60-person mark when you really know what you're doing. You know what to sell, you know your value proposition, you know there's a good market for it, you know what to charge. And then you can start to build out from that. But very often, up until then, or up until 30 people, firms are very often just experimenting with what sells. And so I liken it to an hourglass, where if time goes, you get more and more narrow as you realize what the client actually wants and what your value proposition is. And then once you've got that, then you build out strategically from that.
I don't remember where I read this from you, but you were talking about this barrier that exists for some firms when they get to 10 to 20 employees because they've been built on informal systems up until that point. And at that point, not true for every firm, as you point out, but true for a lot of the firms you observe, those systems seem to fail at crucial points. So is it just a matter of being built to sell regardless of whether that's your ultimate goal?
So I think, that's a good way of putting it. So I think there's two things. I think one is thinking about your firm as a sellable asset is going to help you have a good firm, regardless of whether you sell or not. I guess the second thing is what I would call the S-curve. So this is what they teach at the traditional business school. If you did an MBA, that firms go through a series of S-curves, a period of accelerated growth and a period of flattening out. And the danger at the top of the S-curve is that you're going to start declining. And the reason for that is what got you from A to B will actively prevent you from getting from B to C. So you gave a very good example of the founders' relationships. If you're thinking about the initial stage, long-term relationships, trusted relationships, the reputation of the founder will get you quite a long way. Unless you're building that sales capability underneath you, then actually it's going to act as a chokehold on typically getting beyond 30 people. And so you need to start developing the brand, the digital presence, and also that sales capability in the rest of the firm. And I personally like to see that throughout the firm. So I love seeing a competence map where actually even the most junior people have some responsibilities for business development so that they start to realize it's really important for their progression in the firm. So I think there's two things. One is anticipating those S-curves so that you're not suddenly hit with a surprise when all of a sudden no one knows what anyone's doing in the firm because it's suddenly got to 100 people and quality starts to fail. So it's anticipating those, and that's where a good advisor will come in. And the second is thinking about the firm as an asset. So if someone was going to buy it, what does it look like? What do we have that other people don't have? What do we do really well?
One of the things that you talk about, a term that you use that I love, is managed knowledge. You say that the best consulting firms are built on managed knowledge, not just knowledge. So talk about what that means and how that plays into building value in your firm.
Yeah, okay. So this is the whole intellectual property thing. So I always say to my MBA students, so I say, look, let's set up a typical consulting firm. You've got 100 people in it. You're one of the partners. You're getting profit per partner, and you want to increase your profit per partner. How do you do that? And they say, Joe, it's simple. You increase your prices. What happens if you increase your prices? You're going to lose some clients. Number two, you increase your leverage ratio, so the ratio of seniors to juniors. Typically, if you do that, quality is going to diminish, which means you're going to, or you pay people less. If you pay people less, often they'll leave. So those are the three obvious ideas have real big downsides. So how do you improve your profit per partner and the performance of the firm without breaking the firm, without doing those three things? One of the key things is how you get the knowledge out of the heads of the experts so that the rest of the firm is able to do this. And so I call it the commodification of knowledge. So if you can get junior people to do the work to a reasonable standard that senior people were previously doing, all of a sudden you're making much greater margins on that work. And when I started corporate consulting, I was given a giant book on how to do program management, how to do business analysis, and you go through the stages. That was a highly commodified firm. These days, we've got wonderful opportunities. We've got artificial intelligence. We've got videos that can easily and quickly be made. We've got online training programs that the firm can create quickly. And of course, we've got the mentoring and practice part of it that should be a part of that. But the ability for a firm to strategically get the knowledge out of the heads of the people who do great work and push it down through the organization, codify it, is an opportunity for the firm to increase profits without putting up prices, increasing leverage ratios, or breaking the firm in other ways.
So this gets at where owners resist systematizing. And consultants are smart people by definition, right? And what I find interesting is why smart people that are used to understanding the benefit, long-term benefits, right? That's part of being intelligent, is understanding the short-term pain leads to long-term benefits. Why is it that some consultants don't get it? Right? And why can't they make that transition?
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to put it?
I think it's a very fair way to put it. As I often tell my boys, there are different forms of intelligence. And I'm very sharp in some ways, but I'm very behind the curve in others. And also ego plays a part as well. You get lots of founders who, we've done it this way for 10 years. I've built the firm, so we're going to carry on doing it the same way. Or sometimes partners might be quite protective of the knowledge that's in their head because it gives them power, or perhaps it's part of their identity. So I think there's a host of reasons why people resist that. And also I think a lot of experts, by experts, partners or founders or owners, think that what they do is impossible to write down because it's all almost instinctive. In which case, my view is that you're building a lifestyle business. So if what you do is an art that can only be learnt through 30 years of practice and experience, if you happen to just be a brilliant person, then you haven't got something that's scalable. Something that's scalable is something that is codifiable, something that is repeatable, something that is consistent. And if you think about it, the knowledge architecture of a firm is its major asset. So every time you make a mistake, every time a project goes wrong or a project goes well or you learn something new, if that is captured in your knowledge management system, that's a wonderful gearing mechanism by which you get better and better at the job. And without that, you're going to be doomed to repeat the same mistakes year after year.
Yeah, and I guess what I don't really understand is you would think artificial intelligence would increasingly break through that thinking that my body of knowledge is somehow unique. It may be unique in a lot of ways, and it may be that you communicate it in a very unique way, yet isn't artificial intelligence standing outside the gates with pitchforks ready to pierce that kind of thinking?
John, I think you're right. It's interesting, isn't it? I don't want to bore your listeners, but if you think about professional service, the subject matter of professional services, for consultants, it's organizations. For lawyers, it's obviously the law. For accountants, it's a set of accounts. For doctors, it's the body. Now, those things aren't all equally complex. A set of accounts is actually something that you can, artificial intelligence, in fact, just computers are very good at managing now, which is why what accountants have been responsible for has got smaller, and what the computers have been responsible for has got bigger and bigger. Same with law. Although lawyers are very clever by nature, a lot of their cleverness is simply just remembering what's happened previously and remembering what the laws are. Now, again, it's what computers and AI is very good at. So AI has made really big inroads into accounting and law. With medicine, it's slightly more complicated because people's bodies are complex. But there are consistencies. If you chop someone's head off, they're going to die, regardless of who they are, what culture they're from, and all the rest of it. With the consultants, their subject matter is organizations. And I'm not saying that consultants are cleverer than doctors, but their subject matter is less, it's more open and less determined. So if you remove the CEO of an organization, it's going to depend very much on that organization as to what happens. Is it a small manufacturing company in 18th century Europe, or is it a multinational company that's floated on the stock exchange that operates in the 21st century? So artificial intelligence is, across the board in professional services firms, it is challenging what's happening and what people are doing as opposed to what computers are doing. In consultancy, I think it's been a little bit slower. So it's now very good at some things. So all the evidence suggests that on specific tasks, data analysis, creating PowerPoints, generating documents, it does really well. But at the moment, if I'm turning to artificial intelligence to answers about my clients, it's very good at data analysis, but it's very bad, or not very good, at generating considerate, contextualized recommendations that are really useful. So I think we're getting there. I've seen some stuff in the last week. In fact, just yesterday, I saw an AI system for consultancies that blew my mind a little bit. So I think if you think about the big pyramid of a consultancy or any professional service firm, those bits at the bottom are being replaced as we speak. The real trusted experts who have had 20 years in the industry, I think it's going to be some time before AI comes for their jobs.
You've talked about firms needing to experiment with AI-driven process automation, that if they're not doing that this year, next year, they're going to get left behind.
Yeah, definitely.
And a couple things there. One is, what I think I'm hearing you say is that firms are using AI for client work delivery, but not for their back office. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think both is happening, actually. I think some firms are very good at using deep learning artificial intelligence for their client projects, but those firms tend to be specialists in digital transformation, artificial intelligence, automation. And then you've got another set of firms who know nothing about that, but they're implementing it internally so that their consultants are getting faster at data analysis, report writing, proposal generation.
So what are those simple steps that firms need to take? What are the priorities they need to have in order to start implementing AI, or maybe redirecting it in the direction you think it ought to go for the firm's long-term success?
A lot of firms say we've got Copilot, so we're doing AI. And Copilot, as far as I can see, isn't very good. The first thing, I think the first thing is actually we need to be clear on what we want to achieve as a firm. So what's our strategy? Is it to be highly personalized, tailored, innovative project problem solving? Or is there an element of the firm that is perhaps more processual, more codified, more standardized, that actually we could get some form of efficiency savings using technology? I think there's a danger of seeing AI as a magic bullet. AI is part of a suite of digital solutions that might include automation, low code, no code, existing systems that you already have, and also I would say outsourcing. So, I think anyone as old as me will remember business process reengineering in the 1990s. And a lot of firms had very good success at looking at their processes. A typical piece of work comes in, what gets done? We onboard a new client, what gets done? We've got someone joining the firm, what gets done? What's the process? And I think that type of attention, this is just basic efficiency, that type of attention to your processes is a good thing. The great thing about where we are now is that, number one, there's some off-the-shelf solutions that will speed things up. So a CRM solution, professional service automation solution, will make your processes more robust, more integrated, and it will allow you to make better decisions. I think what we're seeing with artificial intelligence and automation is that a lot of the other processes in the firms are open to the same type of efficiency. So I like to start with, number one, what are you trying to achieve as a firm? And how does technology as a whole support that? I then like to look at, I do two things. One is specific tasks. So I typically survey an organization, you'll get 300 use cases, and you whittle them down to the 4 or 5 things that are really going to move the needle on efficiency. At the same time, when you're looking at the processes of the firm as opposed to specific tasks, you might think, actually, we can probably glue 2 or 3 of these things together to save a consultant a whole load of time each day. And we've all been there, whether it's entering the stuff on your timesheets or making notes when it comes to interviewing a client or analyzing the financial databases of a firm. If you've got a person doing it, there's absolutely no excuse for that anymore. AI and tech can do it a lot faster and better, usually. And when it comes to the processes, sometimes it means gluing those things together in the firm to say, okay, here's the series of steps that we go through when we do our typical project. To what extent can we automate that? But increasingly, there's a fair number of off-the-shelf solutions. So I've just in the last couple of months, I've seen 2 or 3 companies specifically target consultancies with AI solutions that are meant to help their processes, for example, of data analysis. Or of hypothesis testing, or even of building your own processes within their system. So we're at an unusual stage, but I do think this is moving incredibly fast. I've been testing ChatGPT Pro, and it's quite remarkable how good it is. It's as good. I've got 2 PhD students at the moment. It's as good as most PhD students. It still doesn't have that level of contextual knowledge that I would have, for example, about consulting firms. But I can't see any reason why it can't get there in the next couple of years, which is worrying for me.
That's where I want to go next, is how does what AI is doing for consulting firms and where it's going and what the clients see with that or what they perceive. Those are two different things, what's happening and what they perceive. How is that intersecting with pricing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And at the moment, I think there's what traders would call an arbitrage opportunity. Because at the moment, I'll take my work as an example. So if you own a boutique consulting firm, perhaps you're thinking in 2 or 3 years you're going to sell. I have a service where I come along and I do an analysis of the firm to number one, provide a valuation, but number two, identify 3 or 4 basic levers that you can pull in order to maximize the valuation of your firm. In order to do that, I look at the finances, I look at the website, I interview the senior management team, I look at the proposition, and I look at your CRM in terms of your pipeline, your pricing, and all the rest of it. Now, it used to take me, if the client dumps me with all that information, it used to take me about 3 weeks to sift through that. Now, it takes me 5 days. 1 day of that is using AI to go through the stuff that AI can go through. And then the rest of it is me checking that, but also doing the stuff that AI can't do. Now, the stuff that AI is doing, it's doing, for example, an analysis of your finances. I can get the ratios. If you give me your spreadsheets, I can get the ratios out of AI immediately with 0 errors. And very often it will pick up on things that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up on. But there are other things that it can't do, and I focus my time on those. But I've always done fixed pricing for this work. So at the moment, I've got clients who are paying the price that I charged 3 years ago, maybe a little bit more because of inflation for this work. Eventually, clients are going to catch on to this and to say, oh, okay, well, you're using AI, so it's taking you 5 days instead of 15 days to do this. So we want a cost reduction. In which case, as you and I have had a conversation about previously, you have a conversation about value. I mean, the value of what I do hasn't changed.
Right.
And there aren't many other people doing it. So if you want it done, then typically I would say I improve the valuation of a firm by 1 to 2 million. So is whether you pay 20,000 or 50,000 really a massive deal here? But with a lot of firms where there is more competition and clients are perhaps a bit tighter on price and it's harder to demonstrate your value, I would say that actually the pricing is going to come under pressure because you're employing fewer consultants, you're doing more automation, and more people will be able to do it. In fact, clients might be able to do it for themselves at some point. So I think we're in a period at the moment where clients perhaps don't realize which consultancies are using AI and how they're using it and whether they're using it on their project and how. I do think in a couple of years' time, the client market is going to catch up and say, actually, look, we want a bit of a haircut on this pricing. I don't know. Yeah, this is an area. What are your views on this? Are you seeing anything similar?
Well, here's what I wonder, which is a nice way of saying I'm not sure. What I wonder is the extent to which clients, with, of course, our help as professionals, as consultants, whether we can help them shift their view of value. Because using you as an example, what you just talked about, there's value in having the answers faster, number one, regardless of how they're generated.
True. Yep.
And it strikes me as there's significant value in having the experience, knowledge, Professor Joe to manage the gears and understand that, like the example you mentioned, that Copilot is not so great. ChatGPT is great. What do you trust? That you've done the work, smells right, what doesn't smell right, and you've got that unique perspective. and that there is value in the engineer who's at the controls of the train.
Yes, I think that's a sensible way of viewing the situation. It does place the emphasis on consultancies to avoid the low cost trap, to avoid, well, we're doing what everyone else is doing, but we're doing it cheaper, because then price does become an issue and you're not focusing on value. But I think if you can continuously demonstrate that you're top of the game, that you're generating the value, then it's still a useful thing to have. I think the real challenge comes in perhaps 2 or 3 years' time, when AI can perhaps just sit on top of a company's documents and do analysis of it, because in effect I've trained it to do the analysis of it. And then a client might say, why do we need Joe at all? Now, I would hope with a multi-million-pound decision around a sale, perhaps, you would still want to double check what the AI was telling you, even if it was very clever, with someone who'd been through the process 20 times before. But I've just constantly been surprised, so I have no idea what the next 2 or 3 years are going to show us, John.
Yeah, the answer will be different a year from now, but 6 months from now. So it will certainly change. Let's step back and talk about pricing in general, and talk about how you consistently create higher value. And you've talked about that as being really the only reliable way to increase prices.
Yeah.
So with this backdrop we've been talking about, how should consultants think about building value over time in the minds of their clients?
Yeah, I had a great conversation just before this call, actually. I met a CEO for coffee, and he was telling me about how he landed a very small company, very small consultancy. And he was up against IBM and Accenture and they wanted Ford as a client. And I won't go into the details of what it was, but in effect, he decided, look, I'm a tiny organization. I can't compete with the PowerPoints and the analysis and all the rest of it that IBM and Accenture can offer. So he had a walk around the town where the meeting was, where the presentations were being held. And he saw one of the local dealerships, and they were closing it, and he knew that for various reasons. And so in the presentation, he didn't do any PowerPoints. He didn't take the 45 minutes time allotted to him. He went in and said, look, you're going to be closing this dealership. We can turn it round in 3 months. After we've turned it round and it's making a massive profit for you, let's sign the 7-year deal. And then sat down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And anyway, of course, he won the deal. He turned the dealership round not in 3 months, but in 1 month. And then he got the 7-year deal for all the rest of it. Now, I love that story.
Yes.
It demonstrates value. It's, look, you guys want to make money. I'm going to make you money. I'm either going to cut your costs or increase your revenue, or both. And if you can demonstrate that, and I think this is a real challenge for a lot of firms, is really demonstrating the dollars, pounds, euros that they save a firm or they increase the value. And of course, all the research shows that firms see value in different ways. It's not just the money side of things. It's also what's in it for me as the sponsor of the project. It's also your brand and the network that you introduce and how easy it is to do business with you. But really being clear on articulating that value, I think, is the only way to continuously improve your price. Because otherwise it's a race to the bottom. If you're not at the top of your game, really thinking every day about how we improve the outcomes for our clients, as opposed to thinking more internally, then you're in that cycle to the bottom. You're competing on cost. And don't get me wrong, I realize that a lot of RFPs and RFIs do have a big cost element to it. But then for a firm, you need to be very clear about if you're going to bother going for those. And if someone is requiring you to compete on cost, I would say don't bother with it. The quality of revenue is more important than the quantity of revenue.
You mentioned this move toward, from the client side, toward more fixed pricing and value pricing. And I think for some that may come as a surprise to hear that.
Clients prefer fixed pricing because it fits with their budgets. They can get a budget authorized and it's not how long is a piece of fish. And also then there's no incentive for a consultancy to string them along. Clients are sick of consultancies that land and expand and you can never get rid of them. Value pricing is more tricky.
Right.
And I think we've all heard stories about clients saying, oh yeah, if you can save me 3 million, I'm more than happy to pay you 500,000. But actually, when they have to pay the 500,000, they're like, oh, actually, this is a huge amount of money. So again, I think value pricing, most commentators about professional service firms talk about value pricing. I think that only works if you can actually demonstrate that you give better value than the competition, which is a tricky thing to do. I think if you already have a relationship, then having a conversation about value and how we might measure that and how we might bill off that is a great thing to do. But there's lots of situations where that can't be done or the client doesn't want it to be done. I personally am a fan of fixed pricing where it's possible. And the reason for that is in the digital age, we have huge opportunities to reduce our costs of delivery. And unless you've got a fixed pricing model, the client is benefiting from that and your profit margin isn't. So in effect, if your cost of delivery is this and you're charging this and you're making efficiency savings, unless you've got a fixed pricing model, all of this extra margin that you should be making, you're not making it.
So we talked about the size continuum in terms of processes and implementing processes. Does it apply to pricing as well? In other words, is it easier at a certain, when you're a boutique firm, to because of relationships that you mentioned, because of the trust that comes from those relationships, is it easier to value price there? But then as you get larger, you're really cornered into fixed pricing?
It depends on the project rather than the firm, I would say.
Okay.
So I think Boston Consulting Group does a huge amount of value pricing. And they're very good at that conversation, which is to say, okay, this is the outcome. This is the problem. This is what it's costing you. If we get rid of that problem completely, this is going to be the cost saving for you. So let's have a percentage of that we get. And so that they're a really big firm. So Boston Consulting do it, Bain do it, McKinsey do it where possible. And the reason for is that if you can get the right project and you can save a company tens of millions, you can make a lot of money out of it. So I don't think it's a function of size. I think it's a function of the type of project. And some projects lend themselves to value pricing where, number one, you've got a relationship so that you know that the other person's not going to be gaming the system. Number two, that incentives will work to improve the outcomes of the project. And number three, the value is easily priced. I think if there's projects that are more open, you're not sure how long they're going to take, perhaps there isn't an existing relationship, perhaps there's a competitive field and the client needs to be able to judge the different costs of roles, then you're likely to go for a time-based billing model. So I think but I guess the key thing is, the key message I would give an owner of a consulting firm is to say, most of you probably haven't thought about value pricing or fixed pricing, or have an instinctive reaction, which is, oh, we couldn't do that because we can't measure success, or every project is different, so we can't give a fixed price. If that's the case, you probably need to shift your projects a bit, because if you're intending to grow, if you don't have a consistent project methodology that you're working through with a very clear idea of the pricing, then it's going to be very hard for you to scale. So I think there are opportunities there that owners don't necessarily realize.
I would love to go on this conversation, but we're coming down on time, and
Likewise.
I want to get to one of the subjects you wrote about is that I love, by the way, is the role of luck. And the role of luck in consulting success, and that it plays a much bigger role than a lot of people realize, or maybe they realize it and don't want to admit it. Talk about how firms create more luck for themselves. What are they doing? What are they doing differently that the rest of us need to know?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So a lot of founders, you don't get to be a successful consultancy founder. You're not the type of person that leaves a nice stable job with a pension and starts off by yourself, unless you've got a little bit of ego there. Some founders will say, no, it wasn't luck, it was just bloody hard work. Fair enough. Others will say you make your own luck, and some don't. I was talking to a guy this morning, a wonderful guy, of the author of The Naked Leader, David Taylor. And David Taylor wrote the book The Naked Leader, and he ordered 500 copies. They printed 500 copies. It became the fastest selling business book of the last 15 years, simply because someone got hold of it and said, don't buy this book. He sent an email out to all MBA students in Europe saying, don't buy this book, it's dangerous. And it sold 90,000 copies in 2 weeks. It's now been sponsored, and he's had a series of lucky events that just worked for him. He's now got a great brand, all the rest of it. Luck does play a huge part in it. I speak to a lot of consultancies. They happen to land their first deal with Microsoft, and they've only ever worked with Microsoft, and now they're a $10 million, $20 million company. Or you happen to be in the airport lounge where someone comes along. But talking about making your own luck is part of it. So it's having those conversations. It's being in the airport lounge. It's being open to conversations. It's pursuing things that perhaps you might not think there's a big chance, but you never know. And a lot of the stories around luck I hear are very much around people. So who they bumped into, who they had a conversation with, who said, oh, actually, my sister works in that space. Perhaps you want to have a word with her. So it's going back to that old trusted advisor relationship. The more people you can engage with, don't do everything from behind your laptop. Get out there and talk to people, and perhaps luck might be on your side.
Yeah, what I hear is being willing to embrace some discomfort too.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Because some people, especially the kids of I'm sounding old, but that COVID generation, who they'll socialize with their friends online whilst they're gaming, or perhaps they only did lectures on video, they struggle. They struggle with the face-to-face thing. And my big push for digital certainly isn't a replacement to the face-to-face stuff that has worked for consultancy for the last 100 years. No one finds it easy. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to accept sometimes people will say no. And as you say, it's uncomfortable.
Wow. I wish we had more time, maybe 3 more hours, but we don't. So
Thank you, John.
Yeah, wow. This has been fantastic. What a great conversation, Joe. Before we let you go, though, where can listeners that want to know more about you, your work, your books, articles, where can they find out more and connect with you?
If you type Joe Omani into the search engine, you'll get my website, which is joeomani.com, or follow me on LinkedIn.
And folks will have links in the show notes.
Thank you, John. Pleasure talking to you.
You too. Professor Joe Omani, folks. Thank you again, Joe. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on the Price and Value Journey. If you found this episode helpful, which I can't imagine you didn't, share it with others. And if you're not already subscribing, please don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. If you are interested in connecting with me directly, my email address is john@johnray.co. Feel free to reach out, give feedback on the show, guest suggestions, questions I can answer, or certainly if you want to know more about my work, please be in touch. On behalf of Professor Joe Omani, I'm John Ray. Join us next time on the Price and Value Journey.